Alrighty, hello. So, my name is Mikey Marquez, and this is the presentation about the protocell. So, what is a protocell? Now, we've all heard the word proto, but what does it really mean? And it actually comes from a Greek term meaning first of its kind. So basically, this is the first kind of cell. Now, some people may ask, like, well, what does that mean? Well, I'll get to it. So, the thing about this one is it's actually pretty mysterious.
Alrighty.
Because
hello. My name
first
is
off,
Mikey
scientists
Marquez,
aren't entirely sure that it ever existed.
My presentation on the protocell.
And if it did, they're not too sure. Sorry, there we go. Alrighty, so a lot of people might ask, what is a protocell? And we've all heard the term proto before. You got prototype. And so essentially the word proto comes from the Greek alphabet, the Greek language. And essentially it means first of its kind. So basically this is the very first kind of cell, which it's pretty cool because, you think of everything now that's made up of cells, organic matter, and this is the very first kind before life even began on the earth. And that's the thing, that's why it's so mysterious, is just because scientists actually don't know how it first came about. They're a little skeptical that it ever really existed, but they really don't know the true origin of the protocell. But regardless of what that is, regardless of if it existed or not, essentially it is the bridge between all of the inorganic matter that was just sort of floating around in space and everything, and organic. Organic meaning cells and matter that's actually working together. So I talked a little bit about the origins already. So essentially, what was there before? And what there was before was just a bunch of matter, all different kinds of elements. Some elements would collect and form molecules, and, they were organic molecules if they had carbon, but they really didn't work together. Now, something happened, and this is the thing that's been stumping scientists. They're not entirely sure what happened, but at some point, these simple organic molecules started to work together. And I'll talk about the cell membrane because that's actually the big part. But something happened, and they're really not too sure. One hypothesis is maybe lightning could have hit the sea, and then that sort of chemical reaction formed amino acids. And as we know, amino acids are very basic compounds in proteins. So this could really be the actual way, but they really aren't too sure. And so the big differences between, these protocells and, the floating around molecules is, of course, the cell membrane. And the unique thing about the cell membrane was it's the shell that basically, it's a vesicle that just forms around the cell. And before there was a cell membrane, all of the matter and all of those molecules were just floating around, and they didn't really get the opportunity to actually come close and work together. Now with this vesicle around them, and scientists are still not too sure about exactly where the origin of the vesicle came from. However, with the vesicle around them, the matter and the amino acids were actually able to work together, and they were separated from the rest of everything floating around. Essentially they have protection. It's a little shell around all of the insides. And so one cool thing about the cell membrane is it's not just on the outside. There's a term called compartmentalization. And this is very key, especially for our biological cells nowadays, is every single part of the cell has a different job. Now, how can those other parts of cells do their job if they're not separated? If they're all floating around together, essentially, they're not really allowed to do their job. And so compartmentalization is very, very key for the inner functions of the cell. And it really does allow growth because the cell feeds on the myocles, I believe that's what it's called, the myocles, and they're essentially just like a fatty acid, and it grows off of it, and then once it gets too big, it splits. And we've all seen that, you know, the cell gets too big, it splits, and then it multiplies, and you have life. So, there are a few plot holes with the protocell. Now, this is the mysterious part that we've been talking about, is they're missing components. There were two mathematicians, and they figured out an equation, essentially to figure out the functions of the protocell, because you could solve anything with math. However, after forming everything, they realized that they were missing three very key components. Now, there's a chemical in the protocell that they couldn't exactly find the concentration for. They didn't exactly know what the radius of the protocell was, because the radius is actually very key for the life of the cell. You know, of course, the bigger the cell, the shorter its life, you know, sort of like a star. And also the density, because the density is very key, because without density you don't exactly have weight, and you don't really know how big these protocells were. So there are a few missing components, and you know, math really wasn't able to solve that. And at the same time, another set of scientists were actually trying to recreate their own sort of protocell. Now, it didn't work. They were able to make protocells, however, the protocell was not able to live long enough to be essentially to have data taken from, because it would break down, and they weren't sure why. However, it was because of those same three missing components that the mathematicians couldn't find. So the protocell really is mysterious, because we don't know exactly where it came from, we don't know exactly what it was made of, but like I said before on that first slide, we do know that it was the bridge between our inorganic and organic matter. And so that concludes my presentation. This is my works cited page, and thank you.